This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. And now your host, Worshipful Brother Michael Arce.
Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast. You've joined us for an episode on the Gettysburg National Battlefield, specifically the Friend to Friend Memorial. As we welcome back, he's the junior warden of my lodge here, St. John's Lodge number 11 in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. He's also a top 10 Craftsman Online podcast most listened to guest, so a returning champion. As we say hello to Brother David Hosson. Welcome back, Brother David.
Okay, well, thank you, Worshipful. Thanks for having me. It's always a privilege and an honor, so I appreciate it.
What I love about you is you and I share this bond over history, and you got to visit one of the places that is on my to-do items to get to at some point during my lifetime, and that's visit the Gettysburg Battlefield. Have you been to Gettysburg before, and what was your particular reason for visiting this last time?
Yeah, no, so I had visited it once before. I definitely recommend it. It's an amazing setup. It is a moving experience. So I had been there at this point now, I guess, 16 years ago. One thing about Gettysburg, you can do kind of a driving tour of the battlefield, like an audio tour, and they kind of have you stop, at the different landmarks across the battlefield memorial with the description of the events of that day at that site during the 3 days of the battle. There's different apps, I think even some podcasts. But various things, audio tours, like there's several companies that do it. So I definitely wouldn't go to the battlefield and not do one of those tours because it really does walk you through the full extent of the 3-day battle. So I went there this past summer with my son. And so as you know, that I'm a big history buff, and so is my son. And he and I kind of started this, at least this past year, kind of going to museums. And my wife has taken him as well. He's been to the Marine Corps Museum, the Army Museum. And so we've been previously to Antietam, that battlefield, and visited part of the various sites around the battlefield. When I was last there in 2008, they had the old visitor center set up. That was really well done. Kind of a model setup that would walk you through. It would kind of light up, a big kind of like diorama type thing. That would light up and kind of walk you through the battlefield. They actually did go back and totally, refurbish everything. The visitor center is all modernized. Great museum. So that's definitely the first stop for anyone visiting the battlefield. As we were looking at all the different exhibits, now I think I know a decent amount of. I know a decent amount about kind of Civil War weaponry, but his knowledge is exhaustive, and he would kind of walk me through individual firearms, rifles, muskets used. So it was kind of like he was giving me a tour. He was my tour guide during our visit there.
I've gotten to visit the Manassas Battlefield here in Northern Virginia. Bull Run is also on my list, but I think Gettysburg, for a lot of our listeners, that is at the top. It's in Pennsylvania, and the specific area that we're going to talk about, the Friend to Friend Memorial, that was dedicated in 1993 by the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. But as you pointed out, David, there are so many attractions at the Gettysburg National Battlefield. You got the National Military Park Museum, the Wills House, that's where President Lincoln finished the Gettysburg Address, and the home and farm of General and President Dwight D. Eisenhower, all there in Gettysburg. So you can really make a day out of this. And as you mentioned, there is so much Civil War and American history there on the grounds. How did you learn about the Friend to Friend Memorial?
So a couple years ago, I was just kind of curious and looking up information about various Masonic memorials across the United States, and this was the first one that popped up. So I kind of put it on my to-do list that whenever I would go to visit Gettysburg, that we would stop by the memorial. So went with my son, and he was open to us stopping by. So that's something I really appreciate. The memorial is in the cemetery, the main cemetery there. The memorial itself consists of the main statue on a pedestal, surrounded by a stone wall. So the sculpture itself is on a pedestal that depicts General Lewis Armistead when he fell. And he's kind of in a partially upright position, and he's being aided by Captain Bingham of the Union Army. So General Lewis Armistead, then a brigadier general under Pickett. So he's in Pickett's division, leading a brigade during Pickett's charge on the third day of the battle. So he is a friend of General Winfield Scott Hancock of the Union Army, the commander of the Second Corps. On that third day, Lewis Armistead leads a force then to penetrate Hancock's line on Cemetery Ridge. On that third day, he gets through, makes it to a line of artillery, and then he's shot down by Union forces. There's a lot of legends, kind of all sorts of different stories, some kind of conflicting about this event, that as he's falling, he makes a sign, a Masonic, he identifies himself as a Mason in need of aid. And at that point, a Mason, and it's typically Captain Bingham, John Bingham of the Union Army, comes to his aid and provides relief and takes his personal effects back to General Hancock, his friend, who is also a Mason. So all three men are Masons. And then, so the statue, Friend to Friend, depicts that meetup between Hancock and Armistead. And again, Bingham is he's crouching over Armistead, providing aid to him. The memorial consists of the statue. It's on a pedestal, and then it's surrounded by a semicircular stone wall. And the states that participated or had forces that participated in Gettysburg, the names of each state are in relief. Below the statue, then, is, of course, Friend to Friend, the square and compasses of Masonry, and then a Brotherhood undivided. So it really is a touching memorial. I will say then the whole event is really well captured and kind of researched by Most Worshipful Brother Michael Holleran in his The Better Angels of Our Nature. That book it's a really an exhaustive kind of analytical text that really delves into this event and broadly covers the role of Freemasonry on both sides of the war. But he looks at this situation, this event, the meetup between Hancock and Armistead, and he really looks at all of the evidence. He really kind of goes at it as a researcher. Again, there's a lot of legendary stories, several versions of this meetup between Hancock and Armistead. And basically, he looks at accounts from Union forces, from Confederate forces, and he basically comes to the conclusion that, based on the evidence, it really didn't happen the way that we typically believe it to have happened. That Armistead was shot down, but at that point, he didn't identify as a Mason in need of aid. When he was carried off the battlefield by Union forces, the 72nd Pennsylvania, at that point, he also did not identify as a Mason. When he's being carried off by the Pennsylvania, 72nd Pennsylvania, he is met by Captain Bingham. During that encounter, neither man, based on Bingham's account, neither man identifies as a Mason. Armistead doesn't pass on his Masonic Bible or anything. Bingham does take Armistead's personal effects and passes them on to General Hancock. Armistead is wounded gravely, but his wounds, again, based on as the information presented by Most Worshipful Brother Halloran, they're not life-threatening. Unfortunately, Armistead does die on the 5th. So he and Hancock are never able to meet up. Hancock is actually wounded on that third day. Hancock actually stays on the battlefield. I really recommend, really for all Masons across the country, to check out Michael Holleran's The Better Angels of Our Nature, because it really is this exhaustive survey of Freemasons during the war and how they treated each other, how they came to each other's aid, both on the battlefield and after. If one side was in prison, sometimes they actually worked to get fellow Masons released. They attended each other's funerals, protected property of fellow Masons, the property of lodges as well.
The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. We all know the fez is the most identifiable symbol of being a noble and a point of pride for every Shriner. At BricksMasons.com, you can order your hand-embroidered Shriner's fez hat, customize with your temple name, tassel length, pyramid, and even add your initials. Your new fez hat from BricksMasons.com starts at $225, and they offer a really nice interest-free monthly payment installment option if that's a better fit. Plus, get the case and everything else you need to keep your fez on point. Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. Brothers, do you remember how you felt when you were first called to Freemasonry? The excitement of each degree? If you can still feel that call of the East, you're encouraged to apply to join the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction. The Scottish Rite offers Master Masons like you an opportunity to continue your Masonic journey and delve deeper into our craft through their 29 degrees. And there's an easy way to join the Scottish Rite. It's called Join the Rite Night, a virtual initiation where you can witness the requisite 4th degree and officially become a Scottish Rite Mason. There's 7 opportunities to join online from February 1st to April 25th. Here's what you do. Visit the Scottish Rite online at srnmj.us and click on the Join button. You can also join in person at a Scottish Rite reunion near you. Your journey to the 32nd degree in Freemasonry awaits. Take the first step at srnmj.us and click on the Join button today. David, I want to try to retrace this through 2 different paths, and they're all going to reach out to the conclusion here. But the first path I want to take is if we have, a listener who's just a general history fan like you and myself, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be a Mason. I'm just curious, when you got to this particular part of the cemetery, and what's really special about this, as you mentioned, is that this was one of the first monuments that of any type that was ever placed on the battlefield in Gettysburg. And just getting to it, you see, and knowing and understanding what was happening during that time in the country, this division that was literally ripping families and homes and communities in our country apart. And you see one soldier lying down, reaching up to the other with his hand in the other's hand as a way to care and show comfort during this very difficult time. What was kind of going through your mind, just as a fan of history, of all of the stories that you've heard about the Civil War when you first viewed this monument?
So I have to say, it is a moving memorial. And, for me, outside of being a Mason, you see 2 Americans helping each other who share a bond, one coming to the other's aid, that there's something that transcends, political divisions. But as a Mason, it was especially moving, just because, for me, it really shows you that there's something about our craft. It's not just a social club. There's this kind of mystical tie that really binds all Masons. And then here, whether they identified themselves in reality, in real life, if they identified themselves as Masons to each other or not, that there was something that carried through this meeting between the two men, even if it were brief, and it was just a passing of effects. The Masonic character shines through in this encounter. Legends about it, which really kind of represent a lot of real life encounters between Masons during the Civil War. So even if this encounter between Armistead and Bingham weren't necessarily, true to life, at least as it's kind of typically portrayed, a lot of things like this did happen during the Civil War, where you have Masons coming to each other's aid on the battlefield. And in fact, Halloran did identify, another story during Gettysburg. It involves the 20th Indiana, where there's a Confederate shot down who identifies himself as a Mason, and men from the 20th Indiana come to his aid and they carry him off the battlefield. And he's met by other Masons. So, that actually happened. And I think that kind of fed into the Armistead Bingham story.
I'm just thinking of, and I hate to show my age here, but the Civil War has been one of the parts of American history, I would say, that Hollywood just loves to dramatize. And I think we've all seen the movie Glory, Gettysburg, most recently Lincoln. For me, the first kind of taste I got of the Civil War as a kid growing up was the miniseries that was on TV called North and South, with Patrick Swayze and Kirstie Alley back in
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Whew, God, I'm glad I don't have to explain it to you.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to hear this story. And I remember growing up as a kid and thinking, how could our country ever come to this? And this movie or this miniseries, I remember watching before I was even in high school, where I actually, learned about the Civil War and the causes that led up to it and the outcome, and then reconciliation and restructures and everything that came afterwards in American history. And it was just so moving. So I couldn't imagine going up and seeing this statue, especially at a cemetery. I've been fortunate, and I'm sure you have too, to visit Arlington Cemetery here in our nation's capital. And it's a very quiet and stoic experience. And there is so much history that is there. But for the moment, there's no sound, and it's just you're taking all of this in. So I can only imagine, going through Gettysburg and seeing all of the sites that were there and not hearing any sound when you came up to this point.
Yeah, the cemetery was very quiet, and especially at the time of day when we visited. So that definitely added to the solemnity of the experience. We definitely paid our respects there, and kind of thinking about all the Americans who made the ultimate sacrifice there, and of course Masons. Halloran, I definitely salute him. He kind of does the number crunching, and there were most likely about 6,500 Masons that fought at Gettysburg. And again, even though worshipful brother Halloran kind of pokes holes in the legend, I mean, it's still the memorial depicts a real encounter that happened between Bingham and Armistead as Armistead was actually being carried away. There's still that respect between fighting men, between officers. But again, you can't help but think that part of that was just these were Masons who, in general, were just good men who treated others with respect.
And just as a general fan of history, I think the other thing, and again, showing our age here, I think we grew up in the generation where, geez, it was probably the most stressful time in middle school, where we had to memorize the Gettysburg Address. And were any of those words kind of echoing through your mind as you were standing there and taking this all in?
Yeah, no, for sure. And my son is, like I said, a big history buff. And, I think he, really appreciated the experience. He had actually just studied the Civil War the year before. So he kind of went into this just, knowing the generalities about the war. But I think it really, brought everything home for him. And of course, my own, what I knew about the Civil War. And of course, for me, it was a second, visit to the battlefield. But just doing the tour itself too. I mean, as it walks you through every day of the battle between Union and Confederate forces, it really kind of immerses you in the experience. So for me, it was profoundly moving to kind of go through that and just kind of think about the men who experienced that 3 days battle.
Now let's examine this through the Masonic lens. We'll take the other path around the monument. And I'm sure you and I, we've both heard the stories, the tales, the legends, as you kind of alluded to, of brothers that would be on either side of the battlefield that would either provide comfort to wounded or captured enemy Masons, or even display like the all-hailing sign of Masonic distress and look to not shoot or attack groups that they knew that a Mason would be present in. And I've heard these stories, and I'm sure you have as well, and you've always been like, oh, well, that's a very romantic way of looking at the fraternity and the bond that exists in Freemasonry. But to actually get a chance to view this, how did that sit in your mind?
I had read Michael Holleran's book before my visit, so I kind of went into the experience kind of thinking about Masons and their experiences during the battle, during the conflict in general. And it is so profound when you think of these men who, regardless of what army they were fighting in, there was something that tied Masons, that transcended these divisions. And again, these men, looking to aid a brother in need, again, if they were wounded in battle, or imprisoned and starving, looking after the homes of the wives of fellow Masons. These things really happened. So, for me, the memorial represented the entire experience of the men who fought in Gettysburg and in the war, but especially that particular experience of the 6,500 Masons. And Halloran uses the phrase as well, but the Civil War was brother against brother, but it really was Masonic brother against Masonic brother. You still see that no matter what, that there were brothers willing to look out for their brethren within the craft, despite the bitterness of this conflict.
It's interesting to say that. Just one observation I've made, like every year on our podcast, we tend to have a theme, and I don't happen to choose it, but I feel like this year's theme, we've talked a lot about the division that existed in the past and how that division really cracked and kind of frayed American society, but that the bonds that we hold as Freemasons prevailed and kept us connected and kind of kept us together. And that's what I feel so moved when you share the story. I had told you once before, after one of our lodge meetings, of my mother lodge in Schenectady and the reenactment that we go to down in St. Francisville, Louisiana, for the day that the war stopped, which is another great story, which was really the first one that I heard that was more than just a myth or a tale. There's actual, as you've pointed out in this instance, it's documented fact. Like, this actually happened. It's not just some great story that's passed along. And you hear about this, and then as it really kind of reaffirms that lesson that we hear as Freemasons, especially as we take our obligations throughout the degrees, and how this is a fraternity that holds us at a deeper bond, that we can overlook some of those personal differences. Is that kind of the same reaffirmment that you had after visiting this monument?
Ultimately, there's something that, regardless if it's Freemasonry or even just as Americans, there's something that ultimately connects us. We have more in common than what divides us. And I think, Freemasons during the Civil War, these men serve as an example to all of us that there was something that still connected them, looking out for fellow Masons during the war. And it's putting themselves at risk to take care of a brother in need. And again, the idea that there was something that united them that was much more powerful than anything else. It really was a brotherhood of man, under the fatherhood of God, and being mindful of that connected these men to each other. Within the United States, I think there's something about Freemasonry that can that has a healing effect, that can bring people together. And I'm honored to be a Freemason because it really is that brotherhood of man. And I think we can have kind of a healing effect any uniting effect on the rest of society. We look at society now, there's a lot of divisions out there, kind of keeping people apart. And I think Masonry can kind of fill the void and heal, heal society at large.
It's a beautiful way to put that. We'll make sure for our listener, if you're interested in visiting this part of the Gettysburg Cemetery, we'll make sure to have the links to how you can find this and some of the story behind the friend-to-friend Masonic Memorial, thanks to the Gettysburg Freemasons, and also a link if you want to get your own copy of Most Worshipful Brother Holleran's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. Brother David, I'll get you out of here on this question. It kind of spoke to me as a dad as well. Unfortunately, my son not as into history as yours. I feel it would take a little bit more luring to get him to go to Pennsylvania to see this. But was there any question or something that he may have asked you or said to you after seeing this that kind of surprised you and stuck with you during your drive home?
Well, it's funny because I think overall the experience of visiting the battlefield, was a one that was moving for him. My wife's side, she actually has an ancestor that fought in the Civil War. My son is, I'm proud that he's proud, but he's very proud of that fact. He actually has a cavalry pistol that has been passed down in my wife's family from generation to generation. And my father-in-law was kind enough to give that to my son. So that is his most cherished possession. And he's proud of that family connection to the Civil War. His ancestor then fought in the war for Pennsylvania. He kind of looked at, I think his experience, he was kind of looking at it from that perspective, that he has that kind of family connection to things that happened during this war. So, kind of on the drive home, we were just talking about, the experience of the fighting men, what it would have been like. I think he really appreciated the sacrifice made by the men, over the course of those 3 days.
Very special, and I'm almost tempted to say he's got to bring that pistol to Lodge and do a presentation about it, but I don't want to put him on the spot just yet. Brother David Hosson, a returning champion, a most listened to Craftsman Online podcast guest, and so thankful that you came back to tell us more about the Friend-to-Friend Masonic Memorial at the Gettysburg Battlefield. Thanks again for coming on the Craftsman Online podcast.
No, thank you, Worshipful. I really appreciate it.
If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to hear some more, you can follow us on Spotify or hit that subscribe button and get new episodes through Apple Podcasts every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.